comes a moment in every life when you realize something uncomfortable, something you don't admit out loud. Human connection isn't what you thought it was. We grow up believing friendship is simple, pure, natural, something everyone gets to experience if they're kind enough, open enough, patient enough. But then life happens, betrayal happens, disappointment happens, and somewhere along the way, you begin to understand the truth that almost no one is willing to say: genuine friendship is rare. Rare like a diamond. Rare enough that most people spend their lives holding glass, convincing themselves it shines the same. Some people go through their entire existence giving, supporting, forgiving, only to discover that the people they loved the most were simply taking what they could and leaving when the tree was bare. And after enough of these wounds, you stop seeing loneliness as a flaw. You start seeing it as self-defense. This video is not about the fantasy of friendship. It's about the reality, the quiet, painful truth that the world doesn't protect the generous, the loyal, the honest. It uses them. And the more you give, the more invisible you become. But inside every cynic, there is a disappointed idealist, someone who once believed deeply in people until life taught them a different lesson. If you've ever felt like an apple tree, cut down, used up, forgotten, this is your story. And it's time to understand why some of the kindest souls end up standing alone. Why genuine friendship is so rare. Friendship is one of the most praised ideas in human life, yet one of the least understood. We speak of it casually, as if real friends could be found the same way we find distractions or acquaintances. But the older you get, the more you notice a strange pattern. Almost everyone talks about friendship, but very few ever experience the real thing. Most connections we form in life are fragile, conditional, and quietly transactional. They survive only as long as we're useful, convenient, entertaining, or emotionally available in the exact way someone needs. And when that utility fades, so does the bond. This is why genuine friendship feels rare. It is rare. It requires honesty, loyalty, presence, and patience in a world that rewards speed, convenience, self-interest, and emotional shortcuts. Real friendship demands a kind of emotional maturity that most people never develop, because true friendship isn't built on pleasure or comfort. It's built on responsibility and mutual recognition. It requires two people to see each other clearly, without illusions or expectations, and still choose each other. That alone eliminates half the world. And then there's the darker truth. Most people don't know how to be friends because they don't know how to relate without taking. They seek connection not to share life, but to fill emptiness, not to give, but to receive. They enter relationships with invisible ledgers: my attention for your approval, my time for your affection, my support for your validation. It's all negotiation, disguised as loyalty. And when life no longer gives them what they want, they move on, often without a word. To expect genuine friendship from people like this is to plant seeds in barren soil. There is also the quiet arrogance of human beings, our tendency to assume we deserve reliability, generosity, patience, and unconditional acceptance simply because we crave it. But most people want the fruit of friendship without doing the work that cultivates it. They want the softness of connection without the discipline of loyalty. They want the stability of a bond without the effort it takes to maintain it. And so the relationships they form decay quickly because they were built on comfort, not commitment. This reality hardens people. When someone gives deeply and consistently, only to be met with neglect, indifference, or betrayal, something inside them changes. They become cautious, guarded, selective. Not because they don't crave friendship, but because they've learned the cost of giving it to the wrong person. The heart closes not out of coldness, but out of experience. Every person who stops believing in friendship was once someone who believed too much. And yet society loves to judge the solitary. It assumes that a lack of friends is a sign of failure or weakness or social inadequacy. But often it's the opposite. Some people walk alone because they refuse to participate in shallow exchanges. They refuse to be used as emotional furniture. They refuse to waste the deepest parts of themselves on people who only show up when they need something. Their solitude is not an accident. It is a boundary carved from wounds, a protection forged from disappointment. When you understand this, you stop romanticizing friendship as a universal experience and start seeing it as a rare alignment between two souls who both know how to give without exploiting, how to stay without clinging, how to love without taking. And once you see that truth clearly, you realize why so many people walk alone, not because they don't want friends, but because they have learned to stop chasing illusions. The psychology of being used. There is a painful truth that generous people eventually discover. Not everyone who seeks your presence is seeking you. Many are seeking what you provide: your warmth, your stability, your empathy, your loyalty, your ability to listen without judgment and give without keeping score. And once you understand this, the world begins to look different. Not darker necessarily, but clearer. You begin to notice that certain people gravitate toward those who give easily and hesitate to take from those who protect themselves. People who are willing to give too much become magnets for people who don't know how to give at all. This is the psychology of being used, an unspoken dynamic where the giver and taker find each other with unsettling accuracy. The giver offers support, time, understanding, patience. The taker accepts it all without hesitation, without effort, often without gratitude. The giver thinks they're helping, strengthening the bond, proving their loyalty. The taker thinks nothing at all. They simply consume. This pattern is rarely conscious. Most takers don't view themselves as exploiters. They see themselves as victims of life's demands, entitled to comfort, entitled to relief, entitled to the emotional labor of others. In their minds, their needs justify everything. The apple tree story captures this dynamic with brutal simplicity. A boy befriends a tree not because he values the tree, but because the tree is convenient, generous, endlessly giving. He swings from its branches, eats its fruit, rests in its shade. The tree gives because that is its nature. It doesn't know how to withhold. It doesn't understand transaction. It believes the boy's presence is friendship, but the boy's presence is consumption. And as he grows older, his needs grow with him. First he takes the apples, then the branches, then the trunk. Piece by piece he dismantles the very thing that once sheltered him, never out of malice, always out of entitlement. People do this to each other constantly, often without thinking. They take emotional fruit, your attention, your validation, your comfort, then disappear. When their lives break, they return for more. When they feel better, they vanish again. They treat your loyalty as an inexhaustible resource, a tree that will always grow back after every cut. But loyalty is not infinite, and trust does not regenerate as easily as branches. The more someone takes without giving, the more they reshape the relationship into a one-sided extraction. And the more the giver convinces themselves that this extraction is friendship, the deeper the wound becomes when the truth finally reveals itself. What makes this dynamic so tragic is that the giver often blames themselves. They wonder what they did wrong, what they failed to provide, why their kindness didn't create the connection they were hoping for. But the problem was never the giver's effort. The problem was that the taker never came for a relationship. They came for resources. You cannot build a friendship with someone who sees you as an emotional utility. And here is the part most people never admit. Takers know exactly who to take from. They avoid the guarded, the assertive, the self-respecting. They seek out the patient ones, the forgiving ones, the ones who hesitate to say no, the ones who offer second chances long after the first chance was abused. They seek out the apple trees, the hearts that give even when it hurts, even when the giving is never returned. Understanding this does not make you cynical, it makes you conscious. It allows you to see the patterns you once rationalized. It helps you realize that not every request for help is innocent. Not every apology is sincere. Not every return is a sign of loyalty. Sometimes people come back because they know you will give again. And the more you understand this dynamic, the more you recognize that the problem was never your generosity. The problem was giving it to someone who never intended to give anything back. The apple tree syndrome, why the kind get broken. There is a certain kind of person in this world whose kindness is so instinctive, so deeply rooted, that they don't even notice when it's being taken from them. They give not because they want recognition or praise, but because giving feels natural to them, almost like breathing. These people are the apple trees of life. They offer shade without being asked, comfort without hesitation, and support without expecting it to be returned. And because this generosity feels effortless to them, they assume it must feel effortless to others as well. They believe that friendship means reciprocity, care, and loyalty. They believe that people value them the way they value others. But this belief is often the very thing that breaks them. The apple tree in the story symbolizes these souls perfectly. It gives its fruit with joy, thinking it is contributing to something mutual. It offers its branches, believing it is helping a friend build a future. It sacrifices its trunk because it cannot imagine saying no, because its entire identity is intertwined with the act of giving. But here's the painful truth. Takers do not see this generosity as love. They see it as availability. They see it as obligation-free access to comfort. They see it as weakness, disguised as kindness. And once someone like this learns they can take without consequence, they rarely stop. This is the syndrome of the apple tree, the tragic loop where the generous repeatedly give to those who are incapable of appreciating them. Not because they are naive, but because they cannot imagine that someone would exploit the very thing they offer without hesitation. They assume others think like they do. They assume sincerity is the default setting of human relationships. They assume loyalty means the same thing to everyone. But the world does not operate on the logic of the kind, it operates on the logic of the hungry. And the hungry never question whether they deserve what they consume. Over time, this dynamic changes the giver. With every cut, every betrayal, every disappointment, every absence disguised as busyness, something inside them withers. Their trust dries up. Their openness shrinks. Their belief in friendship becomes brittle. They begin to see patterns where they once saw possibilities. They start expecting absence where they once expected presence. They begin to understand that they were never seen as equals. They were seen as resources. And when this realization finally settles in, a deep loneliness emerges. Not the loneliness of being without people, but the loneliness of being unseen among them. What makes the apple tree syndrome so destructive is that the giver often blames themselves long after the taker has moved on. They tell themselves they weren't enough, that they should have been stronger, more useful, less emotional. They convince themselves the abandonment happened because of their flaws rather than the taker's nature. And this internalized guilt poisons them far more deeply than the betrayal itself. They forget a simple truth. Being used is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It is a reflection of someone else's entitlement. This cycle can continue for years, even decades, until the giver becomes what the world mistakenly calls cold. But coldness in people like this is not cruelty. It is protection. It is the scar tissue that forms after repeated emotional amputations. It is the refusal to be cut down again. When someone who once gave endlessly starts withholding, it is not because they lost the ability to love. It is because they learned that love, without boundaries, is self-destruction. The tragedy is that many of these people eventually stop believing in friendship altogether, not because they do not crave connection, but because they no longer trust themselves to choose wisely. They fear their own generosity. They fear their own softness. They fear becoming a stump again, useful until the last piece is gone, forgotten once there is nothing left to take. And yet, beneath the ashes of disappointment, something remains alive. A quiet, faint capacity for connection. A small, trembling hope that someone, someday, will see the value they once gave away so freely. This hope does not die. It only hides. But it will not reveal itself until the person learns to protect the roots they once exposed to everyone. When trust breaks, the making of a cynic. There is a moment, quiet, subtle, almost imperceptible, when something inside a person finally breaks. It doesn't happen in a dramatic confrontation or a sudden betrayal. It happens slowly, through accumulation. 1,000 small disappointments, 100 forgotten promises, a handful of moments where the people you trusted chose comfort over loyalty. Trust is not shattered by one strike. It erodes grain by grain until one day you realize there is nothing left holding the structure together. That is the birth of cynicism. Not loud, not bitter, just tired. Tired in a way that feels older than your age. A cynic is rarely born cynical. They are made by experience, shaped by the slow realization that sincerity is not as common as they once believed. George Carlin famously said, "Inside every cynical person is a disappointed idealist." And he was right. Cynicism grows in the soil of idealism, when expectations are high, when hope was once abundant, when the heart was open enough to be wounded deeply. Cynics are not cold-hearted, they're burnt-hearted. Their warmth was taken advantage of until the fire dimmed. People often mistake cynicism for negativity or bitterness, but its roots are far more tragic. A cynic is someone who has seen too much of the world's hypocrisy, endured too many of its inconsistencies, and learned that hope can be a dangerous thing when placed in the wrong hands. Cynics are not angry, they're wounded. Their sarcasm is a shield, their distance is a defense, their skepticism is a survival strategy. They are not protecting themselves from people, they are protecting themselves from the pain people once caused. What makes cynicism so misunderstood is that it is often directed inward. A cynical person questions not just others but themselves. They doubt their own judgment, they mistrust their own instincts. They wonder how they failed to see the signs, how they allowed themselves to be fooled, how their kindness became a liability. This is the deepest wound. Not the betrayal committed by others, but the betrayal they feel they committed against themselves by trusting too easily. Over time, they develop emotional armor so thick that even genuine affection struggles to get through. They assume every compliment hides an agenda, every apology hides manipulation, every new connection hides potential harm. This isn't pessimism, it's hypervigilance. The nervous system remembers what the mind wants to forget. And once someone has lived through being used, ignored, or abandoned, the body begins to anticipate pain long before the mind consciously recognizes it. The tragedy is that cynics often desire connection more than anyone else. They crave honesty, loyalty, and depth. They crave relationships built on trust rather than convenience. But they fear opening the door because the last time they did, it cost them something they're not sure they can lose again. They have become experts at emotional self-preservation, and like any survivor, they have learned that vulnerability is dangerous once you've been wounded enough times. But beneath the cynicism, beneath the skepticism and sarcasm, there is an idealist still alive, buried under layers of scar tissue, someone who once believed in friendship the way a child believes in sunlight, someone who once trusted freely, someone who once cared without fear. Cynicism is not the death of that person. It is the armor they had to build to protect what remained of them. The goal is not to destroy the armor, but to understand it, how it formed, and why it became necessary. And once you understand that, you begin to see cynicism not as a personality flaw, but as a survival pattern. A person who stopped believing in friendship is not emotionally broken. They are emotionally overeducated. They learned too much, too quickly, about the cost of caring. And until someone shows them they can be safe again, cynicism will remain their only shield against a world that never learned how to treat them gently. Why some people choose solitude over friendship. At some point, after enough disappointments, a person wakes up and realizes something unexpected. Solitude doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels safe. It feels predictable. It feels clean, free of hidden motives, silent expectations, and emotional debts that accumulate quietly in the background of social life. People who have been wounded by friendship often discover that being alone is not the absence of connection. It is the absence of disappointment, and that difference changes everything. Solitude becomes a refuge for those who have spent too long giving more than they received, hoping for reciprocity that never came. When someone finally steps away from social noise and emotional chaos, they experience something they haven't felt in years: relief. The quiet is therapeutic, the stillness is healing. The world, stripped of its demands and misunderstandings, suddenly becomes easier to navigate. For the first time, they are no longer performing. They don't have to smile when they're hurting or pretend to be interested in conversations that drain them. Solitude gives them back the authenticity they lost trying to maintain friendships that were never real. This is why some people prefer an empty room to a crowded one. Not because they dislike others, but because they finally understand how much energy relationships cost. They know what it feels like to carry a friendship alone, to be the emotional caretaker, to give more than anyone ever gave them. They know how exhausting it is to be the reliable one, the patient one, the understanding one, while no one notices that their kindness is slowly bleeding them dry. Solitude restores the energy that people once depleted without remorse. For some, solitude becomes the place where they can think clearly again, where they can hear their own thoughts without the interference of others' desires, where their intuition, their internal compass, can finally speak without being drowned out. And in that clarity, they begin to understand something profound. They were never afraid of people. They were afraid of losing themselves around people. The world has a way of pulling individuals into shapes that do not fit them. Solitude allows them to reclaim the shape they were meant to have. But solitude is not just a sanctuary, it is a teacher. It teaches people to recognize patterns they once ignored. They learn to see the early signs of emotional imbalance, of one-sided relationships, of friendships built on convenience rather than loyalty. They learn the subtle cues, the tone, the timing, the unspoken expectations that reveal whether someone values them or merely uses them. With solitude comes a level of awareness that makes returning to shallow relationships almost impossible. Once a person sees the truth, they cannot unsee it. This is why so many people choose solitude over friendship. They prefer peace to pretense. They prefer honest quiet to dishonest company. They prefer the discomfort of being alone to the pain of being surrounded by people who never really knew them. Solitude, for them, is not loneliness. It is alignment. It is the decision to prioritize their mental and emotional safety over the illusion of social belonging. And yet, choosing solitude does not mean they have given up on connection. It simply means they refuse to settle for half-hearted friendships, manipulative bonds, or relationships where their role is to give until they disappear. They are not avoiding the world, they are filtering it, and the filter becomes very fine. Only those who move with sincerity, depth, and respect can pass through it. In the end, solitude is not a rejection of friendship. It is the space where a person finally heals enough to understand what real friendship should look like. And until they meet someone who reflects that, solitude remains the wiser choice. The rebirth, how broken trust creates a new kind of strength. There is a moment in every wounded person's life when the story begins to shift, not because the pain disappears, but because something inside them evolves. Not all wounds stay open, not all heartbreak remains sharp. Eventually, without fanfare or celebration, the person who was once broken begins to rebuild themselves. This rebirth is not sudden, it is slow, almost invisible, like a seed pushing through the soil in the quiet of early morning. But one day they realize something remarkable. the wound that once weakened them has become the very place where their strength now grows. People think broken trust destroys you, but the truth is more complicated. It breaks you open first, exposing all the illusions you held about loyalty, sincerity, and human nature. You see clearly what you ignored for years. You become conscious of the patterns that once slipped unnoticed through your generosity. You learn to detect inconsistency before it matures into betrayal. And slowly, without meaning to, you develop a new kind of strength, one that is built not on naivety, but on understanding. A strength that is not loud, but unbreakable. This growth happens quietly. You make small decisions that signal transformation. You stop apologizing for things that were never your fault. You stop giving explanations to people who never deserved access to your inner world. You stop giving second chances to those who wasted the first. You stop bending your boundaries to fit the needs of others. This firmness is not bitterness. It is self-respect returning home after years of being exiled. And then, something even more profound happens. You begin to trust yourself again. Self-trust is the rarest form of confidence, because once it's taken from you, everything becomes uncertain. After being used or betrayed, you don't just lose faith in others. You lose faith in your own ability to choose people. You question your judgment, your intuition, your worth. But as you heal, as you sit with your solitude and listen to your own voice again, that inner compass begins to recalibrate. You start recognizing what your body sensed before your mind acknowledged it. You begin honoring the discomfort that once led you into danger. You learn to walk away early instead of waiting for proof that someone doesn't value you. Self-trust becomes the foundation of your rebirth. From this foundation emerges a new strength. Emotional intelligence sharpened by experience, intuition refined by pain, boundaries strengthened by loss. You become someone who cannot be manipulated easily anymore. Someone who cannot be guilted into giving their soul away. Someone who sees through superficiality with unsettling clarity. People may call you guarded, distant, or hard to impress, but that's because they have never lived through what you survived. They do not understand that strength sometimes looks like silence, distance, or restraint. You are no longer easy to fool because you learned too much the hard way. And slowly, something else awakens inside you, a quiet, honest desire for connection again. Not the frantic longing from before, not the desperate wish to be understood, but a calm readiness. You are willing to open the door again, but only for those who knock gently. You are willing to share your world again, but only with those who respect the parts of you that were once exploited. You embrace connection again, but with discernment instead of desperation. This is the rebirth. Not becoming someone different, but becoming someone who finally protects the parts of themselves that should have never been sacrificed. It is the transformation of pain into wisdom, of disappointment into clarity, of betrayal into inner strength. And once you reach this stage, you realize the most surprising truth of all. What broke you was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of your evolution. The final lesson. Why some people remain alone, and why it's not a tragedy. There comes a point in some people's lives where they no longer chase connection with the same hunger they once had. Not because they've lost the desire for companionship, but because they've learned through a lifetime of quiet disappointments that solitude can be far kinder than the wrong company. Some people remain alone not out of failure, but out of wisdom. They have tasted the cost of giving themselves to those who never understood the value of what they received. They have learned that loneliness with integrity is better than belonging that requires self-betrayal. And so they choose solitude consciously, deliberately, almost ritualistically. They build a life that is calm, stable, and free from the weight of emotional unpredictability. They grow gardens of personal meaning, projects, ideas, passions, routines, things that cannot abandon them, things that cannot lie. They become self-contained in a way that puzzles others, but feels natural to them. They stop relying on external validation because they have learned that most validation comes from people who barely understand themselves, let alone you. Their solitude is not a void, it is a sanctuary. But here is the part most people get wrong. Choosing solitude is not the same as rejecting intimacy. Those who walk alone are often far more capable of deep connection than the ones who surround themselves with shallow relationships. Only someone who has known disappointment intimately can appreciate sincerity fully. Only someone who has walked through manipulation and insincerity can truly recognize honesty when they finally encounter it. Their standards rise, not out of arrogance, but out of experience. They stop confusing attention with care, presence with loyalty, or convenience with love. They develop a clarity that cannot be deceived easily. People like this often appear mysterious or distant, but the truth is that they are simply selective. They know what it costs to open their heart. They know how long it takes to recover when they give it to the wrong person. They know that friendship is not measured by how often someone shows up, but by how deeply they stay when it matters. So when they choose to walk alone, it is not a tragedy. It is a form of self-preservation that allows them to protect their inner world until someone truly deserving comes along. And ironically, solitude often becomes the place where they grow into versions of themselves they were never able to become in the presence of the wrong people. Without the noise of empty relationships, their creativity expands. Without the pressure to please, their identity sharpens. Without the constant drain of giving, their energy returns. They begin to build a life that feels aligned, peaceful, and self-directed. And from this place of stability, if connection does appear again, it is healthier, deeper, and far more meaningful than anything they experienced when they were still carrying their wounds unhealed. Some people remain alone because they've outgrown the emotional immaturity of those around them. Others remain alone because they refuse to participate in relationships built on convenience. And some remain alone because solitude has taught them something that friendship never did: how to stand firmly in their own truth, without bending, without apologizing, without shrinking themselves to keep someone else comfortable. So if you know someone who walks through life alone, resist the urge to pity them. What you're looking at is not a defect, it's a decision. A decision born from loss, yes, but also from clarity. A decision that reflects the kind of self-respect most people never cultivate. A decision that shows they will never again be the apple tree that lets others cut them down to nothing. And if you yourself are one of these people, one of the ones who stopped believing in friendship, who walks through life quietly, who protects your heart like a fragile artifact, know this: solitude is not the end of your story. It is the soil where something new begins. You have not given up on connection. You have simply outgrown the counterfeit versions of it. And in that choice, there is not tragedy, but transformation. Not defeat, but awakening. Not emptiness, but a new strength that comes from finally understanding your worth.